Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be taking a look at the very impressive catalogue from one of the greatest and most underrated musicians of all time, the one and only legendary jazz guitarist slash bandleader slash composer, Steve Khan. And I am dedicating this special edition of this series to my dad, whose birthday is coming up very soon. And I know that Steve Khan is one of his all-time favourite guitar players, so this edition is kind of like an early birthday gift for my dad. So ever since Steve Khan burst onto the scene in the late 60s, Steve Khan has built himself up a strong reputation as one of the greatest guitar players of all time, and he has collaborated with a number of great bands and artists over the years. He's played with Patti Austin, Ashford and Simpson, Joe Beck, David Sanborn, the Brecker Brothers, Tim Buckley, Billy Cobham, Jimmy Cobb. He was a member of the Caribbean Jazz Project with Dave Valentine and Dave Samuels. He's also collaborated with Rob Mounsey, Larry Coryell, Eddie Daniels, Miles Davis, Mark Egan, Elements, Donald Fagen, Wilson Felder, Maynard Ferguson, Aretha Franklin, Michael Franks, Billy Joel, Grant Green, Bob James, Chaka Khan, Hubert Laws, Mike Mainieri. He has also played with Steps Ahead, Walter Murphy, Eddie Palmieri, Esther Phillips, you name it, Steve Khan has played with them all. He has also played with Joe Zawinul and was a member of Weather Update, which was due to Wayne Shorter leaving Weather Report, and he was a guest musician for that live touring band. And Steve Khan has released a number of albums under his name as a band leader, a total of 22 albums, including one live album. And as always, I am going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. And I can honestly tell you right now, Steve Khan has not made one bad album. They're all good, they're all very different, and it's very tough to choose which one you think is the best one because, as I said, there's no weak album here. They're absolutely amazing and they really showcase how great of a guitar player Steve Khan is. So we are going to start with the very first one, which was released in 1977, and this is a acoustic guitar duo album with the legendary Larry Coryell, and this is Two for the Road. So this is Larry Coryell and Steve Khan on acoustic guitars in a duo setting, and this is an absolutely gorgeous album. Steve Khan at his absolute best on acoustic guitar, and the late great Larry Coryell on acoustic guitar as well. And what can you really say, really? These two really bring out the best in each other, and Larry Coryell was a big part of Steve Khan's career. He may not have played on many of his albums, but he was a very big part in terms of creativity of his music and direction of his projects. So to see these two work together as a duo playing acoustic guitars doesn't get any better than that. So a lot of these songs cover mainly standards, and there are a couple of originals here as well. So let's just have a quick look. It's a very hard album to find, this one. So we've got Spain by Chick Corea, Bouquet by Bobby Hutcherson, a co-effort composition by Steve Khan and Larry Coryell called Son of Stiff Neck, Juju by Wayne Shorter, another original by Larry Coryell called Sate Gallon, Footprints by Wayne Shorter, and General Moto's Well Laid Plan by Steve Swallow. Brilliant album, produced by Steve Khan, and as you'd expect, an absolute classic. So standout tracks for me, I would probably say, are Spain, Bouquet, and Footprints, but there's no bad song here. So there you have it. Larry Coryell and Steve Khan, Two for the Road. An underrated masterpiece from two of the best guitar players of all time. So there you have it. Two for the Road. So Steve Khan would release his own album in 1977 of that same year, and this is Tightrope. Now, this album here compiles the first three albums of Steve Khan's career, because a lot of these albums are out of print, so I'm going to be talking about each album on here individually because there's like three albums. spread out on 2 discs. So we're going to start with the first album of his, which was called Tightrope. So let's have a quick look. So disc 1 we've got is Tightrope, so we've got tracks like Some Punk Funk, which is kind of like a reference to the Brecker Brothers classic Some Skunk Funk, Darling, Darling, Baby, Sweet Tender Love, the title track, Tightrope for Folon, The Big Ones, Star Chamber, Soft Summer Breeze, and Where Shadows Meet. So musicians we got on here, let's have a look who plays on what. 1 second. So we've got the Brecker Brothers, we got Steve Gadd, Don Grolnick, Will Lee, Jeff Mironov, and Ralph McDonald. And as you'd expect from Steve Khan, every song is top notch from start to finish. So I would say the standout tracks for me are Some Punk Funk, Star Chamber, The Big Ones, and Where Shadows Meet. But Tightrope doesn't have any bad songs and a great debut album for Steve Khan. And a lot of the music on here is very rock driven and very typical jazz fusion of the 70s, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this is still an amazing album. And then we come to the next album, which was released in 1978, and this is The Blue Man. And this features pretty much the same lineup as the first album. So we've got the Brecker Brothers, Steve Gadd, Don Grolnick, Will Lee, Jeff Mironov, and Ralph McDonald. And we've also got some guest appearances from David Sanborn as well. So we got tracks like Daily Bulls, the title track, The Blue Man, some Downtime, and we've also got The Little Ones, Daily Valley, and Eye Over Autumn for Folon. An outstanding album and a great follow-up to the first album, Tightrope. So standout tracks for me, I would say, are the title track, The Blue Man, some Downtime, Daily Valley, and an Eye Over Autumn for Folon, but an outstanding recording, in my opinion. And then we come to the next album, which was released in 1979, and this is called Arrows. So Arrows is kind of like a continuation of the last album. So we've got Steve Gadd, Rob Mounsey, Errol Crusher Bennett, and we've got David Sanborn, and we've also got Don Grolnick and Will Lee and the Brecker Brothers as well. So we've got City Suite Part 1, City Monsters, City Suite Part 2, Dream City, Candles, Daily Village, Some Arrows, Calling. An outstanding collection of songs, in my opinion. Standout tracks for me, I would say, is City Suite Parts 1 and 2, City Monsters and Dream City, and For Calling, but they're all great songs, in my opinion. And as you can see, there's Steve Khan. There's some sleeve notes here. And some more sleeve notes. And some more. A lot more. And some more. And some more. So there you have it. Those are the first 3 Steve Khan albums released in 1977 to 1979. So the first 3 albums we've got are Tightrope, The Blue Man, and Arrows. Good strong debut album, Tightrope, but the first 3 albums, absolute classics. So there you have it. Tightrope, Blue Man, and Arrows. Great first 3 albums of the 70s from Steve Khan. So as we move along, we come to the next album, which was released in 1980. And this could very well be my dad's favourite album. I mean, I love this album too, but I think this could probably be my dad's favourite album of all time from Steve Khan. So this is a solo acoustic guitar album, and this is called Evidence. Steve Khan at his very best. This is kind of like a follow-up to his collaboration with Larry Coryell, but this is now Steve Khan on his own performing solo guitar, and it's just absolutely a gorgeous album. Very new ageist, but at the same time, this is Steve Khan at his absolute best on acoustic guitar. So We've got Infant Eyes by Wayne Shorter, In a Silent Way by Joe Zawinul, Me La Con Lee by Lee Morgan, Threesome by Randy Brecker, Peace by Horace Silver, and we've got the long epic Thelonious Monk medley, which is like 18 minutes long, and this has got Evidence, Think of One, Monk's Mood, Little Rooty Tooty, Monk's Dream, Pananoka, Baya, Ruby, My Dear, and Friday the 13th. Gorgeous album. Probably Steve Khan's best album, or one of his best albums, I would say. And it's probably my dad's favourite album. So the standout track for me would have to be the Thelonious Monk medley, but all of these songs from start to finish are just absolutely stellar. And Steve Khan is unbelievable on acoustic guitar, and I believe Steve Khan got a Grammy for this album, and deservedly so. It's just absolutely incredible. One of his absolute masterpieces. So there you have it. Steve Khan, Evidence, released in 1980. So as we move along, we come to the next album, and this next album would launch the start of his working band called Eyewitness. Now, the name Eyewitness came from Larry Coryell, where he came up with the concept for Steve Khan to have a keyboardless band. So there'll be no keyboards, it'll just be guitar, bass, drums, and percussion. And this will go on to be probably Steve Khan's most important band of his entire career, which will define him for virtually the rest of his recording career. So, once again, this next album is going to have the next 3 albums featured on here because a lot of these albums are out of print. So the next one was released in 1981, and this is Eyewitness, which is the name of the band of the same name. So this features Anthony Jackson on bass, Steve Jordan on drums, and Manolo Banderna on percussion. So an unbelievable band, and these next 3 albums pretty much feature the entire Eyewitness band. So let's just have a quick look. Second. So as you can see, there they are. So we've got tracks like Where's Mumphrey, Dr. Slump, Auxiliary Police, Guy Lafleur, and the title track Eyewitness. Excellent album, and as I said, Eyewitness would go on to be Steve Khan's most important band of his career, and he would pretty much have this band for most of his career, really. So the standout tracks for me, I would probably say, are Where's Mumphrey, Dr. Slump, and the title track Eyewitness. So a fantastic album. So as we move along, the next album would be released in 1982, and it's the same lineup: Steve Khan, Anthony Jackson on bass and contrabass guitar, Steve Jordan on drums, and Manolo Banderna on percussion. So there's Modern Times. So we've got Blades, The Blue Shadow, Penguin Village, and Modern Times. A very only 4 tracks, but they're incredibly long, but at the same time they're just great, and they really showcase Steve Khan as a great guitar player and composer. And Anthony Jackson, for me, is one of the greatest bass players of all time, and probably one of the most reliable musicians you can have in your band. And he's played with just about everyone you can imagine. So standout tracks, I would say, are Blade, the title track, Modern Times, but there's no bad track here. They're all good as far as I'm concerned. So there's Modern Times. So we come to the next album, which was released in 1983, and it's still the same lineup of Eyewitness, and this is Casa Loco. So we've got tracks like The Breakaway, Casa Loco, the title track, Penetration, Some Sharks, Uncle Roy, and The Suitcase. Brilliant album. Once again, Steve Khan with his Eyewitness band, and you know, by this point, Eyewitness have pretty much established themselves as a working band, and they've got their own sound and identity, and they're just a great collection of musicians. And as I said, I probably would say Eyewitness is Steve Khan's most iconic group of all time. So standout tracks for me are Breakaway, Penetration, Uncle Roy, and The Suitcase. So there you have it. Casa Loco, a brilliant album, one of Steve Khan's best. So, and some sleeve notes. There's Steve Jordan. He's the original drummer for Eyewitness. Great player in his own right. Don't really hear much of him now these days. The legendary Anthony Jackson. What more can you say? One of the most respected and legendary and decorated bass players of all time. And I would probably say one of the most reliable musicians you can have in your band. He's just fantastic and one of the all-time greats. And we've also got Manolo Banderna. He's played with Weather Report, he's played with just about everyone, and he's a legendary percussionist in his own right, and he's been a main fixture of Steve Khan's bands for virtually most of his career. He's just unbelievable. He really bags a lot of energy and really packs a punch in the music, and he's not just like your traditional percussionist. He can do lots of things, and he's just an incredible player. There's the man himself. And there's Eyewitness. Great stuff. So there you have it. Those are the next 3 albums that were released in 1981 to 1983. So that was Eyewitness, Modern Times, and Casa Loco. Great collection of music, in my opinion. So there you have it. All great stuff there. So as we move along, we come to the next album. Now, this is a duo album, and this would feature another important collaborator in Steve Khan's career. And this is Local Colour with keyboardist Rob Mounsey. Now, this album is, I wouldn't really say it's a jazz album. It's kind of like a new age album. And Rob Mounsey is one of Steve Khan's most important collaborators. He's been with Steve Khan since forever, and he's an important member of all of his bands and projects. So we've got Steve Khan here on acoustic and 6-string and 12-string guitars, steel and nylon. Rob Mounsey on piano, synthesizers, programming, sequencing, and voice. And he's a tremendous keyboard player. And for me, I would say Steve Khan and Rob Mounsey, you know, they work very well together. And Rob Mounsey is probably Steve Khan's main keyboard player, and he's played with on virtually most of Steve Khan's albums, and they've done quite a few duo projects together. So we've got Tafia, The Blue Rose, I See a Long Journey, Gundalas, Intruder, The Hunt, and Mahana. It's a beautiful album, acoustic guitar and keyboards with a little bit of piano, and it's just an amazing recording and very, very hard to find, and I think it's long out of print now, but if you can find this one, it's just absolutely beautiful. And all compositions co-composed by Steve Khan and Rob Mounsey. A beautiful album. Standout tracks for me, The Blue Rose, Intruder, and The Hunt, but at the same time, this is just a gorgeous album with beautiful songs from start to finish. So there you have it. Local Colour, Steve Khan and Rob Mounsey, released in 1987. Excellent stuff. So we come to the next album, and this was released on GRP Records in 1919. This was the only GRP album he ever made, and it's one of his absolute best, I'd say. So we've got the Eyewitness band back together again, and this time Steve Jordan is gone, and we've got the one and only legendary electric band / acoustic band drummer Dave Weckl, and this is Public Access. Now, this album has a couple of bonus tracks. We've got about 3 bonus tracks here, and it's just a great album. So Steve Khan on guitars, Anthony Jackson on contrabass guitar, Manolo Banderna on percussion, and Dave Weckl on drums. Great album. The album cover is quite funny. So we've got Cisse, Blue Zone 41, Kamarika, Silent Screen, Mambosa, Bhutan Elven, Botiro People, Dedicated to You, and Mama Chola. Great album. Steve Khan, Eyewitness, back with a vengeance, more ferocious than ever, and it's just Steve Khan at his absolute best and some of Dave Weckl best drumming. And him and Anthony Jackson work very well as a rhythm section, and they've been played together in just virtually every setting you can imagine. So standout tracks for me are Sise, Kamarika, Silent Screen, Mombasa, and the bonus track, the 10 minutes long Mama Chola. A great album this is. So let's have a quick look at this. You can see all the compositions. There's Eyewitness. I think Dave Weckl here was kind of like credited as a special guest, I think, but it was not. He only did the one album with Steve Khan. But Steve Khan and Dave Weckl, they've played together quite a lot in a number of different projects with Eddie Daniels. So there you have it. Steve Khan, Public Access, released in 1990 on GRP Records. Outstanding. So we come to the next album, and this is released in 1991, and this is a trio recording and one of my all-time favourite Steve Khan albums. Let's call this. So we've got Steve Khan on guitar and legendary rhythm section of Ron Carter on acoustic bass and Al Foster on drums. Excellent album. I believe this was the first Steve Khan album I ever heard. I remember hearing this on a German television channel called Freesat, and they used to play lots of instrumental music late at night, and I remember two songs they used to play quite a lot from this album, and I remember just hearing this. I thought, wow, I've never heard jazz guitar trio played quite like that. I mean, I've heard a few Pat Metheny trio recordings before, but never quite like this. And this is Steve Khan for me at his absolute best. Guitar, bass and drums, doing what he does best. And for me, as much as I love Eyewitness, they're all great, but for me, there's no better place for Steve Khan to showcase his guitar chops and composing skills than the trio format, and he just sounds absolutely fantastic. And when you add in the legendary rhythm section of Al Foster and Ron Carter, you're going to get nothing but pure class. So we've got Let's Call This, Mascaloro, Backup, Out of This World, Played Twice, Little Sunflower, Buddy System, which is the only composition written by Steve Khan, Street of Dreams by Victor Young, and Mr. Kenyatta by Lee Morgan. Beautiful trio album, one of Steve Khan's absolute best ever. Standout tracks to me are Let's Call This, Mascaloro, Mr. Kenyatta, but there's no bad song here. I just love this album. This is probably my favourite Steve Khan album, or one of them at least, because there's some other great ones coming up that I'll be talking about in a moment. But there you have it. Steve Khan, Let's Call This. Excellent album. Love it. So we come to the next album, which was released in 1992. And this is kind of like half trio and half Eyewitness, but still fantastic. And this is Headline. So we've got on tracks 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, Steve Khan trio of Steve Khan, Ron Carter, and Al Foster. And then we got on tracks 4, 7, and 9, Eyewitness with Anthony Jackson on contrabass guitar, Dennis Chambers now on drums, because Dave Weckl was only a special guest, and Steve Jordan was the original drummer, and Manolo Banderna on percussion. This, to me, was the classic Eyewitness lineup with Dennis Chambers on drums. So we've got Tyrone by Larry Young, The Blessing by Ornette Coleman, Autumn in Rome by Sammy Kahn and Paul Weston, Turnaround by Ornette Coleman, Ontem and Notte by Claire Fisher, Water Babies by Wayne Shorter, All or Nothing at All by Jack Lawrence and Arthur Altman, Hackensack by Thelonious Monk, and Caribbean Fire Dance by Joe Henderson. So this is mostly just all standards, but it's a fantastic album. I probably enjoy the trio side of the album more than Eyewitness, not taking anything away from Eyewitness, but I just love the trio of Steve Khan, Ron Carter, and Al Foster. They just sound absolutely fantastic. So the standout tracks to me are the trio tracks with Ron Carter and Al Foster. So they are Tyrone, Blessing, Autumn in Rome, Otem and Notte, Water Babies, and Hackensack. Gorgeous album, but the Eyewitness tracks are good, but for me, I love the trio tracks just a little bit more. So there you have it, Headline. So now we come to another album. I will probably have to say that the 90s for Steve Khan was probably Steve Khan's best music, creativity-wise. I think this was probably Steve Khan's greatest creative period. He was just making some unbelievable albums in the 90s from like 1991 to like 1997. He was just making some incredible music. So the next album would be released in 1994, and this is one of my other favourites as well, Crossings. So same lineup of Eyewitness, Steve Khan on guitar, Anthony Jackson on contrabass guitar, Dennis Chambers on drums, Manolo Banderna on percussion, and a special guest appearance from Michael Brecker on tenor saxophone on 3 tracks. Great album this is. My favourite tracks of this album are the 3 tracks with Michael Brecker. So we've got Descarga Carnolosis by Steve Khan, which features Michael Brecker, Think of One by Thelonious Monk, What I'm Said by Steve Khan, Pee-wee by Tony Williams, It's You or No One by Sammy Khan and Jules Stein, I Love Paris by Cole Porter, Capricorn by Wayne Shorter, Melancholy by Lee Morgan, Inner Urge by Joe Henderson, and While My Lady Sleeps by Borislaw Kappa-Guskan. Gorgeous album. Standout tracks for me are the 3 tracks with Michael Brecker, which was Descarga Carnolosis and I Love Paris and While My Lady Sleeps, but it's still a great album anyway. And Steve Khan and Michael Brecker work very, very well together, and they play together in a lot of different settings and a lot of different projects. In fact, I remember at one time, Steve Khan and Michael Brecker were both in the famous 7th Avenue lineup with all Steps Ahead members like Randy Brecker, Tony Levin, and Warren Bernhard, and there's all loads of different musicians in that lineup, which would later go on to become Steps Ahead. So Michael Brecker and Steve Khan are no strangers to each other, and they make a hell of a front line. So there you have it. Steve Khan, Crossings. Excellent album. Now, the next period of Steve Khan's career, which for me is my personal favourite, and he would work with 2 musicians who I say were the best 2 collaborators he's ever had in terms of rhythm section wise. And the next album would be released in 1987, and this would for me mark the beginning of one of Steve Khan's best creative periods. He would go on to make 3 incredible albums back to back with this lineup, and the album I'm talking about of this amazing trilogy is Got My Mental, which was released in 1987. We've got John Patitucci on acoustic bass and Jack DeJohnette on drums, and guest appearances from Don Alias on timbales, Bobby Allende on congas, Mark Coronas on timbales, and Cafe on marimba, percussion and voice. Great album, one of my favourite Steve Khan albums, and probably the best trilogy of albums he made with John Patitucci and Jack DeJohnette. So we've got RPDD by Ornette Coleman, Paralinear by Wayne Shorter, Common Mama by Keith Jarrett, the title track by Got My Mental by Steve Khan, The Last Dance by Sammy Khan, James Van Heusen, Sham Time by Eddie Harris, I Have Dreamed by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein, and Cunningly by Lee Morgan. It's a great album. Standout tracks for me are RPDD, Common Mama, and I Have Dreamed, which has a great opening bass intro from John Patitucci. And to me, but we'll cover this in a future review, but for me, John Patitucci, as great as he is with Chick Corea and Wayne Shorter, to me, his best bass playing was with Steve Khan. He just sounds absolutely incredible with him, and Jack DeJohnette make an excellent rhythm section. And to me, John Patitucci is not only my favourite bass player, but he's one of the greatest bass players of all time. But I'll be covering his catalogue of albums on a future edition, so make sure you don't miss that. But to me, this was the peak of John Patitucci's bass work, was the beginning with this album. So there you have it. Got My Mental, the start of, in my opinion, the best trilogy of albums Steve Khan's ever made with these 2. Brilliant album. So we come to the next album. This is another duo album with keyboardist Rob Mounsey, and this was released in 1988, and this is You Are Here. So we've got Steve Khan on acoustic guitars, Rob Mounsey on keyboards, voice, and a little bit of percussion, and a guest appearance from Mark Quinones on timbales, congas, and bongos. Beautiful album, and a nice follow-up to the Local Colour, which they released back in 1987. So it's a great album. So we've got Calafute, Fazendero, Plantos Maduros, Still Life with Mockingbird, Peanut Soup, Pallbearers, Vija I Vija, Engelete, and we got some radio edits of the same tracks, which I've mentioned already. So standout tracks to me are Plantos Maduros, Still Life with Mockingbird, and Peanut Soup and Pallbearers. But it's a great album, and another kind of like a new age-ish sort of recording. So all compositions are written and composed by Rob Mounsey and Steve Khan, with the exception of one by Rob Mounsey and one by Steve Kahn's percussionist Manolo Banderna. But it's a great album, and very hard album to find, this is, but an outstanding recording in my opinion. So there you have it. You Are Here. Great album. Now the next album for me could very well be Steve Kahn's greatest album of all time. And this is the same lineup, John Patitucci and Jack DeJohnette, and this to me is when John Patitucci really hit his peak and cemented himself as one of the best bass players in the world. And this was released in 2005 on Tone Center Records, and this is The Greenfield. So Steve Kahn's been away for a while, so he makes a huge comeback. Same lineup, John Patitucci on acoustic bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, Manolo Banderna on percussion and voice, and also featured on this album is Ralph Irizarry on timbales and Roberto Quintero on congas and percussion. So in a way, this is kind of like Eyewitness 2.0 or 3.0, depending on how you look at it. So this is like kind of like the new Eyewitness here by this point. What can you really say, really? This is Steve Khan at his absolute best. Lots of bass work from John Patitucci. I would probably say there's more bass playing on Steve Kahn's album than there is John Patitucci's own albums. He just sounds absolutely on fire, and there's just so much of him. So we've got Elvinon, Congeniality, Riot, Fist in Glove, Cosca lo que has sembrado, Sanctuary / Nefertiti, Erono, You Stepped Out of a Dream, and the 18-minute epic The Greenfield, El Parado Verde. Gorgeous album. Doesn't get any better than this. This is Steve Khan at his absolute best, and John Patitucci and Jack DeJohnette as the rhythm section are just monstrous, and some of John Patitucci's best bass playing. I would probably go out and say this is probably John Patitucci's best bass work out of anything he's ever done in his whole career. So let's have a quick look. Absolutely love this album. There they are. I remember I met John Patitucci at a bass gallery clinic back in 2018, and I asked him about this album. And I remember he told me that Steve Khan specifically wrote all the compositions for John Patitucci, and he just said that Steve Khan to me is the best guitar player he's ever worked with, and that's saying something. That really is. You know, you think about it, John Patitucci's worked with all the guitar greats, but for him to say to me that Steve Kahn's the best he's ever worked with, that's a pretty bold statement. So the standout tracks to me, as I mentioned, El Veneno, The Greenfield, Fist in Glove, Sanctuary / Nefertiti, and Eronal. Great album this is, and probably my favourite of the trilogy. So we come to the next album, and this would be released in 2007. Same band again, John Patitucci on acoustic bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, and a few more musicians on this album. Manolo Banderna on percussion, Ralph Irizarry on timbale, Roberto Quintero on conga and percussion, Bob Mintzer from the Yellow Jackets on bass clarinet, Badal Roy on tabla, and Gita Roy on tambora, and guest appearances from Randy Brecker on flugelhorn, Rob Mounsey on keyboards, Ruben Rodriguez on bass, Mark Quinones on timbala, Bobby Allende on percussion and conga, and Gabriella Anders on vocals. Great album. This is Borrowed Time, which was released in 2007. It's absolutely brilliant. I love the tracks with John Patitucci and Jack DeJohnette. They're just absolutely humongous. And El Facure with Bob Mintzer on lead bass clarinet is just absolutely just to die for, really. So let's just have a quick look. There we are. Standout tracks for me: I Mean You, Mr. and Mrs. People, El Facure, You're My Girl, Blues for Ball, and the Hymn Song was all the DeJohnette and Patitucci tracks. But it's a good album, but those ones I mentioned are my all-time favourites. Just absolutely brilliant. And 1997 to 2007, 3 albums, probably Steve Khan's greatest trilogy of albums he's ever made, with Jack DeJohnette and John Patitucci. It's just absolutely some of his best music and guitar playing ever. So there you have it. Borrowed Time by Steve Khan, released in 2007. So the next album was be released in 2008, and this is a double live album, and this is a trio, which was a concert recorded in 1984 in Germany. And this is The Suitcase, live in Cologne 94. So it's a double album. Power trio: Steve Khan on guitar, Anthony Jackson on contrabass guitar, and Dennis Chambers on drums. Excellent album. Great live album, start to finish. Disc 1, we've got Wes Mumphrey, What I'm Said, Blue Zone 41, Mila Conley, Played Twice, the title track, The Suitcase, Dr. Slump, Blades. And then disc 2, we've got Guy Lafleur, Uncle Roy, Eyewitness, Capricorn, Dedicated to You, Caribbean Fire Dance, and Mr. Kenyatta. So it's pretty much a retrospective of Steve Khan's career by that point, and it's just absolutely an amazing live album. And there's no standout tracks for me. This is just a fantastic live album and highly recommended to anyone who's a fan of Steve Khan. So there you have it. The Suitcase, live in Cologne 94. And I probably like Wes Mumphrey, What I'm Said, Blue 41, and Uncle Roy and Eyewitness and Capricorn. But it's just absolutely fantastic. So as we move along to the next album, and this would be released in 2011, and this is Parting Shot. So same lineup of Eyewitness: Anthony Jackson on contrabass guitar, Dennis Chambers on drums, Manolo Banderna on percussion, and Mark Quinones on timbale, Bobby Allende on conga, and Rob Mounsey on keyboards and orchestrations, and Tatina Parra and Andreas Biraswat on vocals. It's a really good album. So we've got Chronologically by Ornitz Coleman, Los Gatores by Steve Khan, Change Agents by Steve Khan, Baya, Miriam Mulabambo by Steve Khan and Manolo Banderna, Influence Peddler, When She's Not Here, Blues, Connotation, and Zankundurville and Just Desserts. Just a great album, really. This is just Steve Khan and Eyewitness back with a vengeance, doing what they do best. So standout tracks for me are Change Agents, Baya, Influence Peddler, and When She's Not Here, and Just Desserts. A good album this is, and I almost thought Steve Khan wasn't going to make another album again, but it's great to have him back doing what he does best. And, you know, Steve Khan's made some unbelievable music, and he just gets better and better with every listen. So there you have it, Parting Shot. So we come to the next album, which is kind of a nice follow-up to Parting Shot. And this is Subtext, which was released in 2014. So a different lineup here. Ruben Rodriguez on electric bass and baby bass, Dennis Chambers on drums, Mark Quintones on timbale, bongo and percussion, Bobby Allende on conga and bongo, Randy Brecker on flugelhorn, Rob Mounsey on keyboards and orchestrations, Gil Goldstein on recording, and Marina Ingold on voice. Good album this is. So we've got Blue Food by Ornitz Coleman, Blue Subtext, the title track by Steve Khan, Baraka Sase by Freddie Hubbard, Infant Eyes, Heard, Never Let Me Go, Kada Gota Dimar, Hackensack, and Bait and Switch. It was a really good album this is. Really good. So we've got Blue Food, Blue Subtext, Infant Eyes, Heard, Never Lets Me Go, and Hackensack. So those are the standout tracks for me, and it's a really fantastic album. I love this one. I just recently listened to this again. It's just really good. So we come to the next album, which was released in 2016. And this is Backlog. So same lineup as before, but kind of a couple different changes in personnel. Steve Khan on guitar, Robin Rodriguez on baby bass and electric bass, Mark Walker on drums from Oregon, Mark Quinones on timbale, bongo and percussion, Bobby Allende on conga and bongo, Randy Brecker on trumpet, Bob Mintzer from the Yellow Jackets on tenor saxophone, Mike Mainieri from Steps Ahead on vibraphones, and Rob Mounsey on keyboards and orchestrations. It's a really good album this is. Standout tracks for me, we've got Crisscross, Conceptus in C, Latin Genetics, Our Town, Head Start, Rojo, Invisible, Emily, Go Home, and Kata. Standout tracks for me are Invisible, Latin Genetics, Head Start with Mike Mainieri. Just unbelievable tracks and some great star power from the best of the Brecker Brothers, Yellow Jackets, and Steps Ahead. It's a really good album. So there you have it. Backlog. Great album this is. And we come to the last album, which was released in 2019. And this is Patchwork. So same lineup again. Steve Khan on guitar, Ruben Rodriguez on baby bass and electric bass, and Dennis Chambers on drums. And featured here is Mark Quinones on timbala, bongo and percussion, Bobby Allende on conga, Rob Mounsey on keyboards, Randy Brecker on flugelhorn, and Bob Mintz on tenor saxophone, and Tatina Parra on voice, and Jorge Estrada on keyboards. It's a really good album. This is the last album that Steve Khan has made to date, so hopefully we might see a new one in the near future. So we've got tracks like Epistrophe, C&D, Bouquet, None, Issue, A Shade of Jade, Too Late Now, TNT, The Journey Home, and Huracan Claire. So there's only one original Steve Khan composition, so the rest of it's all standards, but it's still a good album, regardless. Standout tracks for me, None, Issue, C&D, Bouquet, A Shade of Jade, and The Journey Home. It's a really good album this is. And as I mentioned when we started this, Steve Khan has never made a bad album in my book. They're all good, very different, but at the same time, they're just amazing albums. So, I'm going to do something a little bit different here. Which album do I think is the best one? Well, I'm going to say for me, the best album of my favourites is The Greenfield. Love this album. This is my favourite Steve Khan album. And my dad's favourite album, I would say, is... If I can just... Evidence. So, The Greenfield is my favourite Steve Khan album, and my dad's favourite album by Steve Khan is Evidence, which is solo acoustic guitar. So these two are our favourite Steve Khan albums out of his entire impressive catalogue of albums. These two albums really showcase Steve Khan at his absolute best, and if I was to recommend any Steve Khan albums to anyone, I probably would recommend these two, and maybe Crossings as well. They're all good, but there you have it. Greenfield is my favourite Steve Khan album, and this is my dad's favourite Steve Khan album, Evidence. So there you have it. Those are our favourite albums. So, I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Steve Khan album? Is it the Greenfield? Is it Arrows? Is it the Blue Man? Crossings? We all have our favourites. We all have different tastes. There's no right or wrong answer. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, thanks for listening, and a very special happy advanced birthday to my dad.